A day that was originally Christmas. After experiencing the disasters of the year, people are eager to hope that this year will pass earlier and the disaster will be subdued. After all, this year is a year full of pain for all mankind. Plague, famine, war, death, the four horsemen of the apocalypse recorded in the Bible almost ravaged the world once, and human beings are obviously so vulnerable to the disasters brought by nature. But people have not given up hope. Even in the face of disasters, we are still fighting hard, fighting against these disasters, showing the most precious golden spirit of mankind full of hope and never bow to disaster. However, it is as if God made a big joke with mankind. On this day, a huge meteorite with a diameter of more than 10 kilometers was discovered by astronomers, and after calculations, astronomers confirmed that the orbit of this huge meteorite would be similar to Blue. The orbits of the stars intersect and will hit the Blue Star within a few months. The governments of various countries blocked the news as soon as they learned of the news. In order to avoid social panic, almost all astronomers were given the band code. But this kind of news cannot be blocked. After all, meteorites are hanging in the sky. As meteorites get closer and closer to the Blue Star, astronomers around the world can see brighter and larger comets in the night sky as long as they set up their telescopes. Furthermore, the aerospace operations and various countermeasures immediately launched by governments of various countries. In this era when the internet is so developed, it is difficult not to catch clues. These clues naturally spread to the internet, arousing eager discussion at the same time. Some foresight people began to hoard materials after smelling the clues. There have been too many disasters this year, and many people already have experience. Food, medicine, protective equipment, communication equipment. These emergency supplies were sold out immediately. Fortunately, there are quite a lot of disasters this year. Companies that produce these emergency supplies have increased their output of these disaster response necessities, especially emergency food that can be stored for 20 or even 40 years. Supplies in short supply. Even though this year, emergency food has been one of the most popular disaster relief supplies second only to protective gear. It's just that compared to snapping up these supplies, in Chen Xin's view, it is more important to dig a shelter for yourself. Chen Xin is an internet writer. He usually makes a living by speaking code words on websites of various sizes. As a writer, the most important thing is his brain and logical thinking ability. After all, the so-called novel is essentially an attractive logic. Smooth brain hole. And this undoubtedly led to Chen Xin's thinking more complicated than others when facing such a possible disaster. The meteorite hits the Blue Star. How should humans avoid disaster? This question came to Chen Xin's mind for the first time. Fortunately, as an internet writer, Chen Xin usually has a lot of brain holes. He also has the habit of recording these brain holes and trying to think and improve. The situation of meteorite hitting the Blue Star happens to be in the brain that Chen Xin thought about. Within the cave. While hoarding supplies, while searching for information that may be found on the internet, Chen Xin has not forgotten to extract the brain holes he had thought from the folder where he recorded his brain holes. The giant meteorite hitting the Blue Star first brought a violent impact. Judging by the current size of this meteorite, even if countries have a space interception plan, the probability of success is not high. The most likely reason is that the meteorite will shatter into several smaller pieces due to human interception actions, or wipe the Blue Star, or hit the Blue Star. However, this does not mean that the degree of disaster will be reduced, and don't think that a small meteorite is less dangerous, because this small meteorite is relative to the meteorite body with a diameter of more than 10 kilometers. Even if it is broken into meteorite fragments several kilometers in size, hitting a Blue Star can still bring devastating disaster. A meteorite with a diameter of more than 5 kilometers hits the Blue Star, leaving no humans or animals within a radius of at least 1,000 kilometers. The impacted meteorite will lift the material near the impact site directly into space, and the thermal energy generated by the meteorite friction with the atmosphere and the energy released by the impact will form a block that is at least 10 kilometers high and the temperature exceeds thousands of degrees Celsius. The fiery wall of fire swept everything within a radius of at least 1,500 kilometers. Within this range, even if you can hide in an underground bunker, there is a high probability that the high temperature will be as stuffed as a stuffed kill chicken in Miazhu, Guangdong. Even if you dug the bunker deep enough, at least it will follow an earthquake of magnitude 11 or higher is enough to bury you alive. If you are lucky, if humans survive tens of millions of years later, you can still dig out your fossils. If you are interested in leaving some traces for humans, you can raise your middle finger, and later humans will definitely be moved by your optimistic spirit. The shock wave caused by a meteorite impact will spread back and forth several times around the world at several times the speed of sound, so no matter where you are in the blue star, you can hear the violent sound of the meteorite impact. If you are in the opposite hemisphere when the meteorite strikes, there is no danger for the time being, and the sound of the shock wave is enough to remind you to hide in the bunker. But all this is just the beginning, the disaster has just begun. In the next few days, a firestorm consisting of haze and rubble will cover the entire blue star, causing the global temperature to rise from 2 levels to the equator to 70,200 degrees, turning the entire blue star surface into a huge oven. The entire Earth's surface will become unsuitable for human survival. All plants will be roasted and burned by this high temperature. The toxic and harmful gases produced by global fires will spread throughout the atmosphere. UU reading www.uugonshu.com will kill most creatures on the surface of the dead. And all this is still just a prelude to the disaster. Everything can only be said to be an appetizer before the big meal. Because of the increase in atmospheric temperature, the sea level will also rise rapidly, and the impact of kinetic energy released by the meteorite impact will produce a tsunami that is thousands of meters high and hit almost all coastal cities. The dust cloud set off by the impact and the haze formed by the toxic gas produced by the global fire will block the sunlight, cover the blue star for dozens or even hundreds of years, and plunge the blue star into a long dark night. The material thrown into space by the meteorite impact and the smaller meteorite fragments entrapped by the meteorite itself will continue to hit the blue star. In the hemisphere where the meteorite impact site is located, all this is like carpet bombing. The continuous meteorite impact will make few people in the entire hemisphere survive. Even if it can hide in an underground bunker, it is impossible to survive this kind of meteorite bombardment that ranges from a few meters to a few hundred meters almost every day. As for the hemisphere where the impact location is opposite, luck will be slightly better, but there will also be a meteorite falling randomly. It can almost be said that there is a certain chance that the meteorite will smash several tall buildings when you go out. But it's not over yet, because the world is covered by thick dust clouds and haze formed by toxic gases. In the next few months, the temperature will cool rapidly. If the high-latitude cities were not destroyed in the impact, the temperature would drop to -70 degrees, while the equatorial region would be slightly better, probably still -20 or 30 degrees. Because this long night without seeing the sky will last for dozens or even hundreds of years, and the extremely cold weather will last for a whole century, in this long and extremely cold night, the setting of the Ice Age will become a reality. The only difference from the game is that you have neither energy towers to heat, nor robots to work, and you will not see the sun for 100 years. Under a disaster of this scale, if the impact site is in the hemisphere where he is, then Chen Xian feels that he doesn't need to do anything. It's good to eat and have fun in the past few months. When the meteorite falls, face the meteorite. Just raise your middle finger. But if luck is good, the meteorite falls on the other side of the blue star, then digging a deep enough refuge should be able to survive the disaster, and then face 100 years of extremely cold night. Don't think that digging a shelter is unrealistic. In fact, in the 1970s, when the Yan nation and Lucia had a bad relationship, Lucia had planned to carry out a surgical nuclear strike against the Yan nation, but it was not implemented because of the opposition of the Federation at that time. On the other hand, Tasia proposed a plan to dig deep holes based on the news leaked in the newspapers by the federal people at the time. He invested a lot of manpower and material resources across the country to excavate a large number of air raid shelters, and one of the air raid shelters in some important locations. There is an authentic connection between them. These air raid shelters are scattered in every city in Yan country, and most of them are still intact. These air raid shelters are usually 20 meters deep, 200 meters long and 3 meters wide. The two walls are brick walls, and the roof of the cave is a cement board for support. There are ventilation, electricity, lighting, and other equipment in the cave, which can be used to avoid air raids during the war, as well as emergency evacuation and temporary residence after the arrival of nuclear war. And these air raid shelters could still be put into use at any time until the 1980s and 1990s. Only with the disintegration of Lucia and the improvement of Yan Nation's overall national strength, the international situation has gradually improved. These air raid shelters have gradually lost their function and turned into civilian use. They have become material warehouses in many places, places for cooling off in summer, and even underground commercial streets. As for the subway stations built in major cities and the double-deck underground parking lots in the communities, they are actually another form of existence and extension of this kind of air raid shelter. After all, the underground is tens of meters or even hundreds of meters deep. The subway station in Beijing is an excellent cover. Nuclear bombing or airstrikes are not enough to cause structural damage to such a deep cover. Is the specially developed ground penetration bombs and cloud blast bombs that have good damage effects on such deep underground bunkers, but it is still difficult to destroy the overall structure of the bunkers. And the subway lines extending in all directions can build an underground transportation network for the first time, making these bomb shelters and subway stations quickly turn into the kind of underground city in Wandering Earth, but it won't be dug so deep. Chen Xin looked through the brain holes he had recorded at the time and the relevant information he searched on the internet. He can be sure that with the confirmation of the meteorite impacting the blue star, the government is likely to start digging deep underground. Such a way of refuge for disaster avoidance and self-rescue. But simply digging a refuge can only guarantee enough chances to survive when a disaster strikes. What will be the reason for the long nights and winters that will last for decades? Store food? This is indeed a feasible method. Although most emergency foods on the market have a shelf life of 510 years at room temperature, as the global temperature drops, low temperatures of tens of degrees below zero are sufficient to preserve these foods for decades or even more. Century. However, no matter how you store food, in the few months before the meteorite hit, it is great to be able to collect enough food for a person to eat for a few years. Unless you are already prepared, otherwise you want to rely on storage. It is completely impossible for food to survive these long decades. And there is another most critical place: energy. After the meteorite hits the blue star, because the meteorite impact disrupts the ionosphere of the blue star, it will form an EMP shock wave that spreads around the world, and a large number of electronic devices will follow it. In this case, it is obviously no longer to count on a complete power supply. Too practical. Although post-disaster reconstruction will start after the environment has stabilized, and power supply should be restored within a year, power generation requires energy. When the global temperature drops to a few tens of degrees below zero, the Three Gorges project, Yangguo's largest water conservancy hub and source of power generation, will freeze into a huge ice lump, and all the hydroelectric power stations in the country will have the same fate, regardless of size. And this will deprive Yan Nation of nearly 20% of its power generation. Don't think that this is a small number. You have to know that although more than 70% of Yangguo's power generation comes from thermal power generation, under this global disaster, how many power stations and power supply lines are still available? Intact? The answer will be a very pessimistic number, because most of the high-voltage transmission lines in Yangguo are all high-altitude cables due to safety issues. Under firestorms sweeping the world and low temperatures of tens of degrees below zero, the probability of these cables surviving is really small. So by that time, the situation is likely to be the same as in the Ice Age. Humans need to dig coal to get enough energy for heating and heating food. Reading www.yukanshu.com. And to a large extent, human beings may also regress back to the city-state era, where each city will work independently and struggle to survive. Of course, with the Yanguo government's control and execution capabilities, the basic government functions and social structure should be guaranteed. The life after the disaster may be a little bitter, but it can still survive. But considering the various disasters and actual conditions brought about by the meteorite impact, it will take at least 1 to 3 years for the situation to stabilize. Therefore, what lies before Chen Xin is how to prepare in these 3 months so that he can survive this catastrophe smoothly and survive the most turbulent 1 to 3 years. Fortunately, when Chen Xin conceived this brain hole, Chen Xin had serious discussions with friends on the internet, and also consulted many materials, and formulated a complete plan. If it is implemented from now, although time is a bit tight, everything is still too late. Thinking of this, Chen Xin didn't waste any more time, and hurriedly contacted a trustworthy engineering team through his relationship, planning to dig an underground shelter for himself. Regardless of whether the meteorite will hit the blue star, and whether he will survive the first impact, it is always right to be prepared. In addition to digging shelters, storage of food and drinking water is also very important. Chen Xin took out his mobile phone to check his bank balance and decided to buy a wave. Fortunately, there were frequent disasters before, and Chen Xin also stocked a lot of things at home, such as gas masks and medical first aid kits, but he didn't need to buy any more. What he needed to stock up was food and water. As long as there is food and drink, and a place to shelter, human survival needs are not too high. While Chen Xin is actively working to save himself, the governments of all countries will certainly not be idle. The first one to take action was of course the top 5 blue stars. Although we often ridicule that the top 5 blue stars are only 2.5, and the remaining 2 have been removed from the list, in fact these 5 countries are still one of the 5 most powerful countries in the world, and other countries and these 5 compared with the country, after all, the overall national strength and response to such disasters are a little worse. Of course, in the face of this kind of crisis for all mankind, all countries in the world have put aside their prejudices at this time and decided to work together. Among the operations carried out by various countries, the first choice is of course to destroy the meteorite or change its orbit. After all, it is obviously simpler and less troublesome than survival Doomsday, and it can also avoid the impact of meteorites on blue star to the greatest extent. But a meteorite with a diameter of more than 10 kilometers, for today's blue star civilization, it is really harder to destroy it than to climb to the sky. There are really not many practical solutions that countries can come up with. In the special meeting of the United Nations headed by the top 5 blue stars, various plans were proposed and rejected. In the end, only 3 plans were approved by the majority of people. One of the plans was proposed by Yanguo. When the meteorite approaches the lunar orbit, a high-power propeller is installed on the surface of the meteorite. With the combined action of the lunar gravity, the meteorite's orbit is changed to prevent the meteorite from hitting the blue star. This scheme is the most feasible and effective among the 3 schemes, but the technical difficulty is the most difficult one. With the current aerospace technology possessed by mankind, only manned spaceflight in the Earth-Moon system has been realized. Humans have only launched probes in the outer space of the Moon orbit, and want to install propulsion for meteorites when they approach the Moon's orbit. This project itself is a great test of human aerospace technology. Not to mention the need to install thrusters on the meteorite, but also to be able to propel this behemoth with a diameter of more than 10 kilometers. Even with the help of lunar gravity, this still requires the transportation of a propeller that is much more powerful than the largest spacecraft currently built by mankind, and the fuel needed to propel the meteorite. Although humans can urgently modify a spacecraft that can do this in 3 months, the success rate of this plan is still not high. The number 2 plan was proposed by the federal people. With reference to the science fiction films Peerless Tribulation and World Clash filmed in Hollywood, they were able to formulate this plan thanks to the talent of Hollywood screenwriters. That is to land on the meteorite, then make a hole in the meteorite, bury the nuclear bomb, and then detonate it. If all goes well, the power generated by the nuclear bomb explosion is enough to change the orbit of the meteorite, and at worst, it can crush the meteorite, reduce its size, and reduce the damage caused by the impact. This solution is technically less difficult than the one proposed by Yang Guo. Although both solutions need to land on meteorites, it is obviously much less difficult to install nuclear bombs than installing thrusters, and nuclear bombs that can push meteorites it is much easier to build than a propeller that can propel meteorites. There are ready-made nuclear bombs of this level in the top 5 Blue Star nuclear arsenals. Lucia even stated on the spot that they can provide SAR bombs if this scheme is adopted. But a big problem with this plan is that although a nuclear bomb explosion can push a meteorite, it is more likely that it will directly crush the meteorite, causing multiple meteorites to hit the Blue Star. In this case, the damage to the Blue Star civilization will not be lower than that of the meteorite hitting the Blue Star as a whole, so in the discussion process, countries are more inclined to the plan proposed by the Yan state. However, considering the difficulty of implementing the Yan Guo plan, this plan was retained as a necessary B. As for the third proposal, the Lucia's proposed. The Lucia's plan is very simple and straightforward. It is rude and has the characteristics of a fighting nation. It is to directly use all the existing nuclear weapons of the top 5 Blue Stars to carry out a saturated nuclear attack on the meteorite and blow it into pieces. Although the fragments will still impact the Blue Star's surface after entering the atmosphere of the Blue Star, the damage that the meteorites that have been blown up can bring is at least human civilization can withstand, and most of the fragments will burn when they enter the atmosphere. Exhausted, there will not be too many fragments falling on the Blue Star. There is only one problem with this plan, that is, mankind's existing nuclear bomb launch technology is not enough to allow nuclear bombs to fly too far in space, so it must wait until the meteorite is close enough to the Blue Star to launch a nuclear bomb. And in order to ensure the hit rate of the nuclear bomb, a spacecraft needs to be sent to guide the nuclear bomb. But after the nuclear bomb smashed the meteorite, the spacecraft faced the overwhelming meteorite fragments. There is a high probability that it will not survive. This is like laser guidance on the battlefield. If it is a cruise missile, the soldiers on the ground can still keep a safe distance from the target, but if it is a cloud bomb or a nuclear bomb, let alone it is this soldier, it is difficult for all soldiers on the entire battlefield to survive. However, considering that this is a matter of life and death for human beings, reading www.yuyuganshu.com countries do not think that making noble sacrifices for the survival of the entire human civilization is a difficult matter to choose. In fact, although the difficulty of implementation and the probability of success of the 3 programs are different, the astronauts performing the mission are risking their lives, and they are likely to sacrifice for it. After fierce quarrels and discussions, the countries finally decided to implement a saturated response plan, and the 3 plans were carried out simultaneously. The Yan Nation and the Federation will first land on the surface of the meteorite, install thrusters and nuclear bombs respectively, and then try to use nuclear bombs and thrusters to change the orbit of the meteorite or explode it. And Lucia's plan is to prepare for the last let go. If the first 2 plans fail, then this will be the last human effort to deal with meteorites. In addition, countries will also take active self-rescue measures, build underground bunkers, store supplies, and at the same time save as many people as possible and strive to let more people survive. In the face of the common disaster of all mankind, all countries in the world have burst out of unprecedented unity this time. Even the countries that do not deal with it are working together at this time. The Federation took the initiative to provide Yan Nation with the Falcon rocket. At this time, every bit of effort can increase the chance of human survival by 1 point. Technical blockade is not something that should be done at this time. And the Lucias also opened up their nuclear arsenal. Several Tsar bombs secretly preserved in the Soviet era were all donated. 2 of them will be used in the plan of the Federation to carry meteorites for blasting operations. At the same time, the top 5 Blue Star also gathered all the global aerospace resources and invested them in the implementation of the 3 plans. However, in addition to active self-rescue plans, countries are also preparing backup plans for meteorites to strike Blue Star in case the plan fails. In fact, Chen Xian's act of digging the refuge in advance is illegal in terms of procedures, because he has neither civil engineering approval nor project filing. But in the face of the imminent doomsday natural disasters, the whole country has entered a state of emergency. All the manpower and material resources of the municipal departments have been invested in the transformation of the original civil air defense projects. The state also encourages itself to dig out shelters, so no one will take care of Chen Chen. The new underground bunker dug by myself. The Civil Air Defense Project is a nationwide project that the Yan country has been building since the 1970s. Although there are no mountains and dews on the surface, there are actually a large number of civil air defense projects in major cities, but they usually don't pay attention. That's it. For example, the underground parking lot of a shopping mall or a residential area does not seem to be anything special except for the entrance and exit and the interior. There are heavy lead grey iron doors, but in fact this is a civil air defense project. These underground parking lots have 3 defense capabilities. It can be used as air raid shelter and refuge in wartime or even in the context of nuclear war. And now, in the face of possible meteorite impacts, the country is not only actively defending, but also vigorously transforming these civil air defense projects into shelters that can accommodate residents for a long time. Because of the high temperature generated by the meteorite impact and the subsequent dust cloud and toxic haze, the Earth's surface will become unsuitable for human survival in the next 100 years, with low temperatures and long periods of tens of degrees below zero. The dark night will be the only sight that humans can see on the surface in the next few decades or even hundreds of years. Therefore, under such circumstances, the refuge transformed by the underground civil air defense project will become the last home for human beings to survive and live in the next decades or even hundreds of years. Originally, these civil air defense projects did not consider long-term residential use. They were designed only for short-term shelter. And now that humans are likely to live underground in the next few decades or even hundreds of years, it becomes necessary to transform these civil air defense projects. Especially after a meteorite impact, it will bring short-term high temperature and extreme cold extreme climate, which has higher requirements for the ventilation facilities of these civil air defense projects. Therefore, while the country has joined forces with other countries in the world to actively respond to the arrival of meteorites, municipalities and engineering personnel across the country have also been mobilized to upgrade and transform these civil air defense projects, as well as more critically expand them. Large underground facilities such as subway stations and underground shopping malls are being planned as future underground cities. After all, a facility that is buried deep underground like a subway station and can be connected to other subway stations at the same time is really an excellent choice for transforming into an underground city. This is actually one of the functions reserved during the construction and planning of the subway station. You must know that when the German air attacked London during World War II, Londoners escaped the German bombing by hiding in subway stations. In addition to the transformation of air defense projects, the reserve of various materials has also become the focus of the country's response to disasters. Food will not be in short supply for the country in a short period of time. The country's food reserves are sufficient for the country to eat for 3 years, but most of the food is concentrated in granaries across the country. Now it needs to be transported to distribute the food from the granary to various in the planned refuge in the city. All tasks are being carried out in an intense and orderly manner. Although some people want to take advantage of this kind of panic, they want to engage in trouble or supplies, but under the premise that the state has implemented a state of emergency, the police are no longer responsible for maintaining law and order. It is the army, and these people who want to die will naturally be attacked by the army, fulfilling their wishes. Under the country's overall planning and strong control, most of the shelters have been completed on schedule, and material reserves have been put in place, which can accommodate people to enter them for refuge. At the same time, considering that the place where the meteorite might hit the Pacific Ocean, people in coastal areas were evacuated to the inland areas. Although this has caused serious losses to the national economy, at this time, in the face of a possible huge tsunami, it is impossible for the country to put hundreds of millions of people in the southeast coast at risk for a little economic benefit. Just like Tasia's famous saying, "Land lost, people and land are lost, people and land are saved, people and land are saved." As long as people are alive, the city can be rebuilt without people, but if people are gone, who will carry out the post-disaster? What about reconstruction? In just a few months, the country has to prepare a plan to deal with meteorites as well as prepare for disaster prevention across the country. Even in a country like Yan State, where the government has strong control, it must do its best. With one heart and one mind, I can barely finish most of the work in such a short time. In countries where the government has insufficient control, society has fallen into a state of collapse. Small countries in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America and other places lack the government's ability to respond to this hierarchical crisis. At this time, the order of the entire country has collapsed, and the society has entered a state of disorder. For a package of food, people in these areas may draw guns and fight each other and cause death. A life is not even as valuable as a piece of bread. At this time, in these areas, humans have returned to the most primitive state of the weak and the strong, and humans are no longer much stronger than the beasts. The only thing they think about is how to live. Although this is the same as the thinking of people in other areas who are still under order, the ways in which the two sides achieve this goal are very different. If it were before, other countries might still lend a hand to the chaos in these regions and the disasters they are facing, but now all countries are overwhelmed. Even the best Blue Star 5 can only guarantee that they are facing this situation. In the face of a global catastrophe, they can protect themselves. In fact, even among the top 5 Blue Stars, only Yan State, where the government has a high degree of control over the country, is in the best condition. Although Britain and Gaul are not in a state of disorder, the society is still chaotic, with a large number of demonstrations. The riots still made the governments of the two countries struggling to cope. As for Lucia, the situation is much better than that of Britain and Gaul. Especially as a former superpower, Lucia inherited most of the legacy of the Red regime at the time. In response to this global catastrophe, it was entrusted to them. With the blessing of the Red heritage, coupled with its own geographical environment and climatic conditions, Lucia did not experience much chaos, and the situation is much better than that of Britain and Gaul. As the only existing superpower on the Blue Star, the situation of the Federation seems a bit strange. Chen Xin was also sitting in front of the TV and watching this action. After all, it is about the life and death of all mankind. At this moment, all the media on Blue Star are reporting this incident 24 hours a day. Although the meteorite is getting closer and closer to the Blue Star, all countries have issued disaster warnings, but now the meteorite is still approaching the lunar orbit, and the Blue Star has not been substantially affected, so Chen Xin did not hide in the refuge he dug in. Although the shelter is safe, there is no internet or TV because of the deep underground. Chen Xin wants to understand the situation of the rescue operation, so he still has to stay at home and watch TV. As for the other people in the city where Chen Xin is located, they have been evacuated one after another during this period and entered the shelters that have been mostly remodeled in batches. If the action goes well, they will leave the refuge after successfully intercepting the meteorite, but if the interception fails, everyone will spend the rest of their lives in the refuge. Chen Xin did not live in the city due to personal reasons. Although there were government workers who mobilized him to go to the shelter before, because he had dug the shelter, Chen Xin stayed at home and did not go to the country to build it. Refuge. Moreover, although the country has tried its best to transform the shelters, and is also trying its best to allow everyone to enter the shelters, but because some shelters were not completed as scheduled, and the shelter capacity is limited, in fact not all shelters everyone can enter the shelter. According to Chen Xin's prediction, the city where he lives is okay, because the population is not very large, and most people can still enter the shelter. But as far as the whole country is concerned, being able to allow more than 80% of the population to enter the shelter, Chen Xin thinks this is already very remarkable. After completing the refueling of the spacecraft of the Yan Nation and the Federation, they left the Tiangong Space Station and the International Space Station and set off again. They will first orbit the Blue Star, use the Blue Star's gravity to complete a stage of acceleration to the Moon, and then use the lunar gravity to perform a second stage of acceleration in the lunar orbit, so that the spacecraft can accelerate to close to the synchronization of the meteorite travel speed when the meteorite arrives. Speed, so that it can accurately land on the meteorite. Looking at the three spacecraft that have left the space station and become smaller and smaller as they were photographed by the space station lens in the picture, Chen Xin couldn't help but pray silently for the warriors on these three spacecraft. Now, the hope of all mankind rests on them. If their actions fail, then mankind will face the global extinction brought about by the meteorite that struck the Gulf of Mexico 65 million years ago that dinosaurs faced. Some people may argue that the extinction of the dinosaurs is not yet certain that it was caused by a meteorite impact, but Chen Xin can say with certainty that if the meteorite coming to the Blue Star is really smashed down, 90% of the Blue Star is still present. The above species will be completely extinct, whether it is land or sea, it will be the same extinction catastrophe. As the last descendants of dinosaurs, birds may have escaped the last disaster, but this time they may not be so lucky. The high temperature and toxic gases brought by the firestorm that swept the world, and the accompanying extreme cold the long night will wipe out all the birds flying in the sky, the large creatures on the land surface, most of the plants, and all the fish in the shallow ocean area. Only tenacious animals such as mice and cockroaches that are good at punching holes can escape this catastrophe, but it is also unknown whether they can survive the extreme cold nights when food is scarce. As for marine life, don't worry about it. Although the ecology of marine life in the shallow waters will be devastated, the marine life living in the deep sea will not be extinct, and even some of the shallow sea marine life will survive if luck is good. As for humans, it depends on luck. People living in a country where the social order has not collapsed will at least have the government organize an asylum. After avoiding the disasters caused by the early meteorite impact, there is still a high probability of surviving and spreading fire to human civilization. But people living in countries where the social order has collapsed are not so lucky. If they stay away from the place where the meteorite hits and can find a solid basement and store enough food during the next period of time, there is still a certain chance of surviving. If not, they are likely to die in the ensuing disaster within a few days after the meteorite impact. Of course, if they were less lucky and were just near the impact site of the meteorite, then they might not be able to live for a day, and they would die without pain. As for this neighborhood, it is a circle with a radius of at least 1 or 2,000 kilometers. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com because it takes a long time for the spacecraft to fly to the Moon's orbit. Although the TV station has been broadcasting live, Chen Xin did not stare at the TV all the time, but was making final preparations before entering the shelter. Although this is about the survival of 6 billion people in the world, Chen Xin also hopes that this operation will be successful, but he is not optimistic about this plan. The Yan Nation and the Federation plan to use nuclear bombs to explode the meteorites, and then use thrusters to push the meteorites away from the impact orbit. This scheme sounds really good, and the feasibility is not low. The current technology of mankind does indeed do it without any cost. Obtained, I am doing it now, but there are not many uncertainties. For example, before landing on the meteorite, there was a flow of debris around the meteorite, which prevented the spacecraft from landing or destroyed the spacecraft. After going up, the meteorite was too hard to drill. Meteorite is not a sphere with uniform texture. Under the blast of a nuclear bomb, the irregular shape and uneven texture may hold up the nuclear explosion without being exploded, or it may be blown too open and split into several pieces. If it is not exploded, the texture of the meteorite may be harder than expected, and the mass will also be much larger. In this case, the heavy spacecraft prepared by Yan Nation may not be able to push the meteorite, or the thrust is insufficient, and it is not completely change the orbit of the meteorite. In this case, we can only hope that the Lucians can use all the nuclear bombs in the world to crush the meteorite. But in this case, the best result is that the world will suffer a huge wave of meteorite rain, causing huge losses to human society. And if it exploded and broke into several pieces, that would be the worst situation. Because Yan country has only one heavy spacecraft prepared, it can only push a meteorite. If it really becomes a situation of multiple meteorites impacting, then it is very likely that Yangguo used the spacecraft to push away the largest meteorite, and the rest will go straight to the blue star. The nuclear bombs prepared by the Lucians may smash some of them, or they may smash all of them. If they smash all of them, then it would still be a huge meteorite shower around the world. But if there is a relatively large meteorite that has not been crushed, you can redraw the map of the world once you are a human being, the kind that redraws the outlines of all continents together. This is why Chen Xin is not optimistic about this action. There are too many uncertain factors affecting the success rate of the entire action. But mankind now has no time and the leeway to think about this. There are only two choices before mankind: it may be possible to survive if you fight, and if you don't fight, you will wait for an ending with dinosaurs, pulling 90% of the global species perish together. Therefore, human beings can only do their best to adopt such a plan that is the most feasible and has a certain success rate, hoping to save Blue Star and humanity. I hope they can succeed. If there is a God, no matter what God, please be sure to bless these brave astronauts to complete their mission to save the Blue Star and save mankind. Chen Xin prayed piously to all the gods, chanting the names of all the gods he could think of, and even the old rulers and foreign gods did not let go. At this time, if an indescribable man is driven madly, it's much stronger than a meteorite hitting it down and everyone pointing their middle fingers together. But after all, praying was just a psychological comfort. After praying a lot, Chen Xin organized some of the things that were to be moved to the refuge at home, packed them in boxes and moved them to the refuge. Chen Xin had already transported all the materials such as food and drinking water long after the shelter was dug up. Even Chen Xin's own car drove off and parked in the reserved garage. The things he has moved down now are just some living utensils, personal belongings, washing and changing clothes. As for electronic products such as computers, televisions, and console games, the televisions are still at home, and only computers and console games are moved. As for the televisions, they will have to wait until the end of the operation, depending on the situation. Although in case the operation fails, it is foreseeable that the network and electricity will be cut off with the end of the day, but he is the only one in Chen Xin's refuge. According to his expectation, he will hide underground for at least 1 year. Such a long time. Time has nothing to pass the time, that is really terrible. As for the EMP impact caused by meteorite impact disturbing the ionosphere, this is good for Chen Xin to resist, because his refuge is made by burying a container house, and the container house made of metal materials can be regarded as a Faraday cage, and it is deep. Buried underground, the EMP impact has limited damage to his electronic products. Putting away the things he moved down, Chen Xin also checked the 3 tons of gasoline he had stored in a custom-made large water tank. This was a result of a lot of effort by him and the help of his father's previous contacts. These gasoline will be his entire and only fuel reserve for the next 1 or 2 years. Of course, the gasoline is not ignited for heating or cooking, nor is it used for the car parked in the garage, although he will use the gasoline to make a fire for cooking or start up when necessary. Cars, but these gasoline are not used for these now. In fact, these gasolines are stored in old and new ones and are ready to be used to generate electricity after a power failure. When building this underground shelter, Chen Xin took into account the power outage and bought 2 small household generators. This kind of small household generator is very small, and an adult can even carry it with one hand one by one. The power generation range is 310 kilowatts, which is sufficient for household use. The 2 small household generators purchased by Chen Xin have a power of only 5.5 kilowatts, which is considered to be a medium model. The fuel tank can hold about 20 liters of fuel and can work for 1,215 hours at rated power after being filled. Taking the 3 tons of gasoline that Chen Xin had in reserve, it was enough for him to use it for a whole year. Of course, when you actually use it, you don't burn a tank of oil in one day, which would be too extravagant. Chen Xin is equipped with a large battery in the shelter. The plan is to use the generator for 6 to 8 hours a day. In addition to meeting normal power consumption, the excess power will be stored to save fuel consumption. After all, there are no high-power electrical appliances in the refuge. At most it is an induction cooker, an electric blanket, and electronic products that Chen Xin may use. This is more than enough for the small household generator he prepared, and only needs it every day. Onet heard of the work time is enough to ensure electricity consumption throughout the day. Although it is expected that the possible long night and winter will last for decades, UU reading www.yukanshu.com, but Chen Xin can only collect so many materials. As for whether these materials can support oneself for a year, and what should be done after these materials are consumed after a year, Chen Xin remains optimistic. According to the current preparations made by the country, in the next year, as long as the meteorites are not directly hit on Yan Nation, then the basic social structure of the country and most of the population will be preserved, although everyone will have to live there in the underground shelter, but will eventually survive. In 1 year, as the environment stabilizes, the country will also start reconstruction work and restore social order. At that time, Chen Xin believes that whether it is food or fuel, he should be able to find a way to obtain it. No matter how bad it is, there are official refuges to rely on. He is not worried about his own survival at that time. After taking inventory of his own supplies again, and confirming that all the supplies were sufficient for a year according to his own estimates, and after a few months of surplus, Chen Xin left the shelter and returned home, again paying attention to the latest progress of the rescue operation. Although they are not optimistic about the success rate of this operation, if they can successfully save the Blue Star, Chen Xin will still be happy that he will not have to live in a shelter for the rest of his life. However, spacecraft are obviously not so fast. At the speed of human-launched spacecraft, it will take about 4 or 5 days for them to reach the lunar orbit. After all, they need to use the Blue Star's gravity to accelerate to save flight time and precious fuel. At this time, they have just completed the first lap of the Blue Star's gravitational acceleration, and then they have to orbit the Blue Star 2 more times before they can gain enough kinetic energy and speed to fly to the Moon and land near the Moon's orbit. On the surface of the meteorite, rescue operations were launched. In the quiet and endless space, the Moon is quietly spinning around the Blue Star. And not far from the Moon's orbit, a meteorite with a long bright and sparse comet tail is rushing towards the Blue Star. If there are no other factors, the meteorite will hit the Blue Star in a few days, causing the same Blue Star species extinction as it was 65 million years ago. It's just that humans dominate the Blue Star today, not the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. The wisdom and technology we possess allows us to confront and survive the impact of such a huge meteorite. At this time in the lunar orbit, 3 aircraft that have completed acceleration are flying towards the meteorite with the most powerful weapon of mankind and hope, hoping to destroy the meteorite and prevent disaster and catastrophe. Houston, this is Endeavour. We are close to the meteorite and request approval to start the rescue plan. On the Space Shuttle Endeavour, the captain was talking with Blue Star. The expressions of the 7 astronauts in the cabin were very nervous at this time, but also with a little excitement and a sense of mission. Because they carry the hope of all mankind, if the action is successful, they will also be heroes who will save the world. Maybe Hollywood has made too many movies to save the blue stars. These astronauts have more or less federal heroism and feel that they are the protagonists and they will definitely be able to save the world. This confidence gave these 7 astronauts a lot of confidence. Together with the other 7 astronauts of another Atlantis, these astronauts from the Federation maintained a positive and optimistic mood. Think that you can successfully complete the task. Optimism is not a bad thing. After all, if they fail, what is waiting for the blue star will be a devastating end. The burden they carry is the survival of the trillions of creatures and species on the blue star. In fact, the astronauts of the Federation team, Yanguo team and Lucia team who were responsible for this mission had specialized psychologists to give them psychological guidance after learning about the mission, making them feel positive and optimistic. State. Because the responsibilities they bear are too heavy, the life and death of all mankind and the fate of the entire blue star are imposed on them. If their psychological endurance is slightly weaker, they are likely to be emotionally broken. Although the astronauts themselves are carefully selected people with good psychological qualities after many levels of screening, the most experienced and best quality astronauts were selected for this mission, but this kind of thing is related to the safety of the world. Mission: no one dare to bet that these astronauts can really withstand so much psychological pressure. In case any astronaut on the space shuttle cannot bear the pressure and emotionally collapses, it is likely to ruin the only opportunity for human beings to save themselves. Therefore, the United Nations Action Team deliberately keeps these astronauts in a more optimistic attitude, which not only makes them more emotionally stable, but also allows them to have a better state when performing missions, which can increase the success rate of the mission. At this time when the fate of the world's 6 billion humans is pinned on this mission, any method that may increase the success rate of the mission will be tried by the action team, as long as it is really effective. It's just that although the United Nations Action Team has mobilized all the resources of the world and is doing everything possible to and provide support for this rescue plan, hoping to increase the success rate of the mission as much as possible, but in fact everyone knows this time. The task is just a gamble, to use the fate of all mankind to gamble on a near minimal chance. But despite the gambling, mankind still has the hope of winning, that is, the astronauts of the 3 countries can successfully complete their mission and eliminate the threat of this meteorite impact. As a result, under the attention of 6 billion people around the world, the 2 space shuttles Endeavour and Atlantis, which were replied by NASA, flew toward the meteorite, while the spacecraft piloted by the Yanguo astronauts remained. At the back, they need to wait for the Federation to complete the task before they can start their task. At this time, on the Blue Star, Chen Xin was using his mobile phone to discuss the topic of the rescue mission with his group of friends in the survival group, while watching the Federation captured by the Yanguo spacecraft live on TV. The scenes of the 2 space shuttles flying towards the meteorite really made them nervous. Landing on the surface of a meteorite is not that simple. Even if the Federation uses a spacecraft that has the ability to take off and land like an ordinary airplane, it is very difficult to land on the surface of a meteorite. First of all, the space shuttle does not directly rush towards the meteorite. In that case, the space shuttle will have difficulty landing due to the relative speed between the two, and even crash directly on the meteorite. So the 2 space shuttles must keep the same direction as the meteorite. UU reading www.uuconchu.com maintains a relatively stable state with the meteorite at sufficient speed so that it can land on the surface of the meteorite. Because the orbital intersection point was calculated in advance, Endeavour and Atlantis, after accelerating by the lunar gravity, approached the meteorite in a synchronized flight, and then landed on a relatively flat surface of the meteorite. But the meteorite has now formed a comet tail as it is gradually approaching the Sun. This is the trajectory formed in space by the material on the surface of the meteorite under the influence of the solar wind. If you look at the blue star, this will be a very beautiful light band. But if you want to go through it, for the space shuttle and astronauts, it is equivalent to driving in a sandstorm or hail. Life or death depends on luck. Good luck, it may just be a sandstorm with a little windier, it will be difficult to land but not fatal. But if you are unlucky, it is hail, and you can still smash the window glass and hit the roof of the car with large pits and hail, enough to destroy the space shuttle. At this moment, the astronauts on the Space Shuttle Endeavour and Atlantis are really gamble with their lives, betting on a chance to land on the surface of a meteorite. Houston. We are in trouble. The meteorites are surrounded by debris streams. They are blocking our way. We need help. The voice of the federal astronaut on TV made Chen Xin's worries come true. Because it is a simultaneous live broadcast of 6 billion people around the world, there is no such thing as entering the advertisement or cutting back to the studio. The federal astronaut's call for help can be described as an instant commotion around the world. In the small group established by Chen Xin and his friends, many people have already begun to cry that this rescue operation will fail and feel that they will live in a refuge for the rest of their lives. It's over. If the Federation can't land, our astronauts can't land either. In that case, the meteorite can neither be blown up nor pushed away. The blue star will be over. I am panicking a lot now. Who can tell me whether the refuge 50 meters underground can withstand the impact of meteorites? It's dead, the shelters near my house are already full. My sister, and my girlfriends haven't gotten shelters. We have to wait for the next wave. Isn't there a boss in the group who built their own refuge? Can your refuge let me use it? I brought my sister and my girlfriends. This is my sister and my girlfriend. The boss think about it. What? Looking at the seemingly crooked discussions in the group, Chen Xin still didn't hold back his hand and opened the picture. He didn't mean to let the other party come, just wanted to take a look at the clothes of his sisters and girlfriends. Well, just look at the clothes, but don't have any other thoughts. After all, if the meteorite really fell down, it is estimated that in the next 100 or 200 years, there will be no girls in low-cut backless outfits, and the weather conditions do not allow it. But apart from these episodes, Chen Xin continued to pay attention to the rescue operation. He felt that neither the United Nations Action Team nor the astronauts of the Yan country and the Federation would give up their mission because of the debris flow on the surface of the meteorite. At this time, there are actually two solutions. One is to use the Yanguo team's strength to disrupt the gravity near the meteorite with the weight of the Yanguo spacecraft, thereby attracting part of the debris flow, opening a gap for the Federation team and allowing them able to land on the surface of a meteorite. But if you do this, the mission of the Yan national team cannot be completed. After all, the fuel carried on the spacecraft is limited. If they do this, they will consume the fuel originally used to complete the mission, which may cause the mission to fail. Of course, they can also adopt another scheme. First, drop a nuclear bomb and use the nuclear bomb to blow away the debris flow on the surface of the meteorite. After all, the two space shuttles are equipped with a Lucia-sponsored Tsar bomb. The huge energy that can push Europe with the Tsar bomb can definitely blow away the debris flow on the surface of the meteorite temporarily. After landing on the surface of the meteorite, as long as the Federalists can successfully install the nuclear bomb, the power of the nuclear bomb explosion can not only blast the meteorite, but also blow the newly generated debris flow, so that the Yanguo team can land on the meteorite surface with the help of heavy spaceflight. The thrust of the vehicle affects the trajectory of the meteorite and makes it deviate from the impact trajectory. For the federal people, there are not many choices. Although using a nuclear bomb will allow humans to crush all the treasures on the option that the nuclear bomb carried by another space shuttle can successfully explode the meteorite, there is still hope that the mission will be completed if it is not done. Then they can choose to return and give up the choice of changing the orbit of the meteorite. So after a little consideration and inquiring about the specific conditions of the astronauts on the two space shuttles, the Federation decided to use a nuclear bomb to blow away the debris flow on the meteorite surface so that the two space shuttles can land on the meteorite smoothly. Surface. Soon on the live broadcast on the TV, one of the two federal space shuttles, Atlantis, opened its cabin and dropped its own nuclear bomb toward the meteorite. The Tsar bomb dropped by Atlantis was quickly captured by the gravitational force of the meteorite and fell towards the surface of the meteorite. The astronauts in the space shuttle also took the opportunity to detonate the nuclear bomb. This is the second time in human history that nuclear weapons have been formally used in addition to nuclear tests. It is also the second explosion and the first official combat mission after the development of the Tsar bomb. Is just this time the most powerful weapon of destruction invented by mankind, but it is no longer used to kill and destroy, but to save mankind itself. This has to be said to be a great irony. But it has to be said that the power of the Tsar bomb deserves to be the title of the strongest nuclear weapon produced by mankind. Although the huge explosion did not set off a mushroom cloud in space, the huge explosion was like a broom, blowing the surface of the meteorite dry. Clean. Seeing the stream of debris pushed away by the shock wave of the nuclear bomb explosion, the audience watching the live broadcast couldn't help but cheered. Even in Chen Xian's small group, everyone was sighing for this, feeling that there was hope for everything, and the crisis brought by this meteorite could be resolved by mankind. Is this the legendary Tsar bomb? I really love it. If only it could be drawn by Li. When are you still thinking about the wife of the paper man? I don't want to think that if the meteorite really falls, it must be a global power outage, and you can't even connect to the internet. Where else can you hold it? The phone licks his wife. Compared with this, do I care more about the other people who live in the shelter of the big brother's house? I also have a girlfriend who said, pictures ignored the crooked building in the small group. Chen Xin was watching the live broadcast on the TV seriously at this time. With the explosion of the nuclear bomb, the flow of debris on the surface of the meteorite was temporarily blown out of a huge gap that allows two space shuttles to land on the surface of the meteorite. Watching the federal team take advantage of this costly gap to plunge towards the meteorite, and lose its trace on the surface of the meteorite, Chen Xin couldn't help but grabbed his heart and began to walk around the room. He thought he had been downcast, but seeing the debris flow on the surface of the meteorite blown away by the nuclear bomb, exposing the surface of the meteorite, the two space shuttles rushed down without hesitation, and Chen Xin inevitably fell into anxiety. Worried. Can the Federation people successfully complete their tasks? Can the Tsar bomb explode this meteorite with a diameter of more than 10 kilometers? Will the explosion disintegrate the meteorite into a pile of fragments? These kinds of questions are all around Chen Xin's mind at this time, making him feel unnerved and restless. At this time, most of the 6 billion people in the world should have the same emotions as Chen Xin, but everyone is waiting for the Federation team to detonate another Tsarist bomb and explode this meteorite. It's just that the waiting time is a bit long, and every minute and every second is a torment for the 6 billion people in the world. It's like a sentence of death sentence. It may die in the next second, but it may also be possible to escape in the next second. But it takes time for the Federals to install the Tsar bomb. Other than that, if you want to explode the meteorite, you must drill a hole in the meteorite enough to put the Tsar bomb in. Drilling is obviously a time-consuming activity, which is why everyone is waiting, but what is worrying is that the communication with the Federation team has been strongly disturbed because of the relationship between the detonation of the nuclear bomb just now, and it cannot be maintained at all. So at this moment, there are 6 billion people in the world. Except for the Federation team, no one knows what happened to that meteorite.